If I got it right, I think Easter's 2 weeks away. Do I have that right? 2 weeks. 2 weeks till the Super Bowl of the church, right? And I don't know how you're praying. I'll tell you how I'm praying. I'm simply praying for open doors. And here's why. Because 2,000 years ago, when God rolled that stone away, he opened the door for us to truly know him and have an eternity with him. He opened the door, and that's what I'm going to pray for again. It feels weird in this season to say, hey, we're going to have Easter, and we want you to invite people. By the way, you know why people come to Easter more than any other service out of the year? It's because they get a personal invitation. And so I'm going to encourage you, would you give a personal invitation to people who don't have a church home? Why? Because they'll say yes to you. They might not know me at all. They might not say yes to me. But doesn't it seem weird in a season where some people are not comfortable meeting indoors? Like, how am I supposed to extend that invitation? Listen, I'm praying for God to open doors. Not just the grave, right? But the open doors to people's hearts that they might go, yeah, I need that. Can I just tell you what the open door often is? It's the pain and discomfort that we've had from this last year where people go, there must be more to this life than what it is I'm experiencing. Where's God in the midst of this? And see, sometimes our pain is the open door that we need to say, come, we think that there's an answer, and it's found in Jesus. So this Easter, I just want you to start praying for open doors, okay? And would you be the person who just does the inviting? You with me? All right, and I'm talking to you at home too. All right, you got to invite people. I don't even care if you invite them to the online virtual service that you're watching right now. Invite them to that. We'll be live streaming that. All right, here we go. The last 12 weeks, early January, we started teaching and looking at the book of 1 Peter. And there's only 5 chapters, and we're just starting the 5th chapter, and it's week 12. Someone in our church called me out on it this last week. Like, Pastor, you're like preaching this letter of 1 Peter like one word at a time. I was like, okay, so this week we're going to ramp it up. You ready? 2 words this week. Woo! Be shepherds. That's where Peter is at in chapter 5, verse 1. He says this, I want you to be shepherds. Don't miss it. This is the invitation to lead. And for some of you, I just want you to hear this. You're leaders. You know you're a leader. You have a place of leadership. I want to encourage you in your leadership this morning. The second thing, though, is this. Some of you, you might not see yourselves as a leader, or you lead something over here, and God wants to. Maybe in the next year, maybe in the next weeks, the months to come, he wants to take you from your current place of leadership, and he wants you to strive for something more. And today, you might actually hear that calling and invitation in your life for him to invite you to that. So here's where we're going to head. Peter writes this. He says, 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 1. By the way, you got a Bible open? I see a bunch of heads looking down. I love it. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 1. He says, to the elders. And here's why I'm slow rolling through this letter, is because there's so much good stuff in here, but I bet you skipped this. Because when it said to the elders, you're like, oh, I'm not an elder of a church, so therefore this doesn't apply to me. Listen, what this does, it does 2 things. It clarifies what kind of leadership God wants in the church. And the second, I think what we might miss is we might miss that it's an invitation for you. If now you know what leadership looks like, maybe he's actually inviting you and equipping you to become that leader. So, question, is this message that Peter's writing to just for elders? Listen, the answer is no. The answer is no, because yes, he's writing to a specific group of churches, and he wants the elders to know. But here, the whole letter is read to the entire church. Why? Because he wants everybody to know what godly leadership looks like, so that they can strive to become the kind of leaders that God wants them to be. Now listen, in our church today, the church has become big and complex. 2,000 years after Peter writes this, we got leaders all over the place. We got leaders in our kids' ministry. We got leaders in our student ministry. We got leaders over our community groups, leaders in our Women of Wonder ministry, leaders on our compassion team, our care team, our missions team. We got leaders on our elder board. And listen to this, if you're a parent, you're a leader of your family. We got leaders everywhere. So don't check out on me, because Peter starts with, to the elders of the church, I'm about to write this. Here's what I want for this morning. I want us to look at this letter that Peter wrote 2,000 years ago, and I want you to find your encouragement today for your current position in leadership. And I want some of you to listen. because what I'm about to speak from this word might actually be God's invitation to you. How do you know if it's God's invitation for you to step up as a leader? How do you know it might be his calling? I think it becomes personal. Quick example. I was in elementary school, Covina First Baptist, sitting in a hard wooden pew, my buddies on my right and my left, and they're taking out their pocket knives to undo the Bible holders in the wooden pew in front of you, so the next person that came in would put their Bible down and it'd fall apart, and I didn't care. I didn't care because when that pastor was preaching, I was glued in. I can't even tell you the message that he preached, but it was that moment that I felt like it was personal to me. Not only was it personal to me, but I wanted to be able to encourage people the way that he was encouraging me. That was the beginning of my calling to become a pastor. So I don't know when it might happen for some of you, but our future pastors might be in the room right now. Don't miss your calling. Your calling begins when it starts becoming personal to you. So here we go. Here's how Peter begins this. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 1, to the elders among you, I appeal as a fellow elder and a witness of Christ's suffering, who also will share in the glory to be revealed. Now, there's a lot of words there. I want you to hang on to two of those words because he introduces his appeal to be a leader with two main words, suffering and glory. And I will tell you, those two words are all about pastoring. It's all about leading people, suffering and glory. This last Wednesday, I was at an outdoor, in-person gathering with about probably 30 to 45 pastors there. These are all church leaders, and the two pastors who were leading, they have each led churches and done ministry in this valley, each for 40 years. 40 years these guys have been leading, and they both said the same thing. This last year, in the last 12 months, has by far been the most difficult to lead. I mean, in 40 years, these pastors have seen so much, but it's about suffering and it's about glory. And if you're going to be a leader in the church today, or you're going to be a leader in the world today, here's what leaders are. Leaders are resilient. 40 years, these two men had been leading, and I just want to say this. Resilience, I think, is embracing pain, but knowing it will be worth it in the end. It's embracing pain, knowing that it's going to be worth it in the end. A couple weeks ago, I was talking with somebody, and they passed along a message from someone. The message they passed along was from someone I have not heard from for 20 years. But this gal had been in our student ministries program down in Southern California. She passed along the message to me. Now, granted, 20 years I haven't seen this person, talked to this person, and she said this: those days in our student ministries, those are some of the best, most formative, most cherished years of my life. God still has my heart because of those years. There were some moments down there when we were leading that group, we were wondering, is anybody listening? Is anybody following? Parents, you know this, right? Are my kids even listening? And then 20 years later, you get a message like that, and you just go, you know what? If you're resilient, there's going to be suffering, but there will be glory in the end. It's worth it. So here's where Peter goes. I think that's just a warm-up to this to say, listen, if you're going to lead, you have to be resilient because it's not easy. But I don't think that's a shocker to anybody in the room. Peter then makes his appeal, and he gives us three areas. These are three qualities of a leader. Three things. If you're going to lead, you got to have each of these three. So here it is. The first is this. Leaders got to be smart. Here's what he writes. Be shepherds of God's flock that is under your care. And you're like, okay, how does that mean be smart? Let me explain it to you. I don't have a lot of experience with shepherding, okay? At least not sheep. A little bit of cattle experience is what I got. South of here, about an hour and a half, there's a ranch down there that a buddy of ours owns, and he invites us down every now and then. We've taken our staff there. We've done some retreats there, and on one occasion, I was there with my family, and Pastor Josh was there, and I think Pastor Elliot was there, and Tim, the ranch manager, he said, I need your help. We need to move the cows from here to there. This is leadership, right? What is leadership? It's helping people move from here to there. And so he said this, you got to understand the layout of the ranch. By the way, I've told this story before, but it is so worth telling again. The the half of the ranch is over here. There's a road that goes down the middle, single lane traffic either way. There's hardly ever a car on the road. The rest of the ranch is on this side of the road. He's like, the cattle are over here, and we got to get them over there. Here's the game plan. The rancher says, I'm going to open the gate here, and then I'm going to get behind them. You guys, 3 of you, you just go down, you stand at the end of the road, and you open the gate. And all you got to do is stand at the road so that when the cattle walk towards you, they just make the left-hand turn into the field. It's going to be easy. So Tim, the rancher, he gets behind the cattle, the gate opens, we go down to the end, and we stand there, and Tim gets them moving. And then he gets on his dirt bike to go ride up in the hills to make sure that he has all the cattle, right? And the cattle start moving down, and this plan is working perfectly until it's not. Halfway down, the cattle stop. And having all the amazing cattle wrestling cowboy skills that I have, I looked at everybody else and was like, whoa, what do we do? And so I was like, well, we just need to pull them down this way, right? So in my best cowboy voice, I was like, come on, cow. Yeah, you're laughing because you know it didn't work, right? Like, well, if you can't draw them, if you can't pull them, then what do you got to do? If you can't pull them in, you got to push them. So I knew this. You got to get behind them somehow because you can't pull them this way. You got to get behind them, and it's called a cattle drive, right? You got to get behind them, and you got to drive these animals. Now, I don't know if I heard this from somebody or read it somewhere, but I think I remember this is true. When you're around cattle, if you don't want to spook them, don't look them in the eye because they take that as a threat. I could have just made that up. I'm not really sure, but I thought I remember hearing that somewhere. So I'm at the end of the road, boom, start walking down the road, not looking them in the eye. And I get about halfway down the road, like in the midst of the cattle. And all of a sudden, I can tell it's not going well because the moo turned to moo, like they're going through puberty or something. Like it was just, they started freaking out. I finally get behind them. And I know what to do at this point. This part's not hard because I've watched City Slickers twice. You just got to give them a little verbal cue, right? Yeah, come on, little cows, right? So I go, yeah, come on, little cows. And they just go, and they don't move at all. So I went into dad mode. You know what dad mode is? Dads, you know what dad mode is. It's because when your kids don't listen to you, what do you need to do? You get louder. Come on, you know, it's embarrassing, but it is dad mode. So I get louder. Yeah, let's go, cows, come on. And you would have thought I would have set off a bomb in that moment. Cows run everywhere. They run into the metal fence over here. They head off back into the field where they came. They start busting through the barbed wire. And I'm thinking, oh, this is just not good. And at that moment, here comes Tim, riding his dirt bike back in, and what he sees is cows running everywhere. Pastor Josh on a quad, riding through the fields, trying to head off the cattle. And he goes, what happened? And so I told him, these cows are defective. They are broke. They're good for nothing but burgers. Like, we're having burgers today. And he informed me after I told him everything I had done. And he said, well, maybe you didn't do it right. Because what you have to understand about cattle is they have triggers, things that set them off. Listen, go back to Peter. Peter could have written this: I want you to lead the church. I want you to manage people. I want you to teach the congregation. But he didn't. He said, I want you to shepherd the flock. Now, if you're offended that God referred to you as animals, I don't think he's quite saying, listen, if you want to figure out how to work with church people, figure out how to handle animals, all right? I don't think that's exactly what he's saying. But I think what he's saying is this: just like cattle got triggers, just like sheep got triggers, you got triggers. And if you're going to shepherd people from here to there, which is leadership, you better realize that people got triggers, and you can't just get behind them and drive them to where you want them to go. If you don't think you have triggers, let me just prove it to you. What if I just told you, hey, next week in the church, we're going to talk about politics? What if I told you next week we're going to talk about the government and COVID? What if I told you next week we're going to talk about racial inclusion? See, you got triggers. And I just gave you 3 examples. And in those triggers, people were triggered on all different sides of that. We, as pastors, as leaders in the church, we're supposed to take a group of people that have all kinds of triggers. And depending on what you say, we're trying to take them from here to there. We're trying to help people cross the line of faith, knowing who Jesus is, and grow to spiritual maturity, knowing that when you say something, it might set off a bomb and have people run in every direction. And Peter says, I want you to be resilient in that, but here's what you need. You need to be smart. So what is smart? Smart is this. It's about having the emotional intelligence to first understand yourself and then understand the triggers that live in people. And then you've got to have communication skills to help people move from here to there. It's about having a high EQ, emotional quotient, emotional intelligence. Maybe we thought that the model of shepherding in the Bible was all about authority. You tell people what to do. They should listen to me, parents. They should listen to me because of my position. Mom, why do you want me to do that? Because I told you so. There's a statement about, well, you should listen to me just because I'm your parent. And as much as that might be right, it doesn't work. Your kids have triggers. The minute that you try to tell them what to do and it feels demeaning to them, there's an explosion. Leaders, you first of all have to be smart. The second is this: leaders have to be hungry. Leaders are hungry. Here's where he goes. Chapter 5, verse 2, halfway through, he says, watching over them, watching over the flock, not because you must, but because you are willing, as God wants you to be, not pursuing dishonest gain, but eager to serve. As a leader, here it is, you can't serve out of duty. You've got to be willing, enthusiastic, and eager to serve. So here's what it means to be hungry. Hungry is a strong work ethic for the benefit of the group, never putting out the minimal effort. You've done a group project, right? You know the person who is not hungry, because they either don't show up to the group and expect to get a good grade like everybody else, or they put out minimal effort knowing that you're going to pick up for their slack. By the way, I'm going to say this. There's a lot of pastors out there that are hungry. There's a lot of leaders out there that are hungry. This doesn't mean that you don't have good work-life balance and take care of yourself. This isn't an excuse to be a workaholic, but good leaders do take on more responsibility. Good leaders, they're self-motivated, they take initiative, and they go beyond the call of duty. This last year, we brought 2 new elders onto our board, Harlan Gaines and Augie Walter. And you know, when I first contacted them, I said, hey, I'd love to talk to you about becoming an elder at our church. They both responded the same way. I can't believe you would call me. I mean, I'm honored that you would even think of me in this position. And after talking to them about it, they said, I'm all in, let's do this. Why? They were hungry. They didn't feel like, oh, gosh, the church needs this, and I guess, we're hurting for some leaders, and maybe if I have to, I will. If I have to, I will. We don't want those kind of leaders. You know why? Because when it gets painful and when it gets tough, people who do it out of duty don't have the resiliency to stick with it when it gets tough. So leaders, the third category here is this. Leaders are smart, leaders are hungry, and then this. Leaders are humble. Look at verse 3. Not lording it over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. And then he writes this: all of you clothe yourselves with humility towards one another. Let me say this, humble. Humble's actually the most important trait because it focuses on the greater good of the group rather than allowing the ego of the leader, to hijack the mission. I'm going to say it this way. Sometimes we're not sure what humility looks like. We mistake lack of confidence for humility. Lack of confidence, where somebody hides in the shadows and they don't actually step out because they're not sure if they're a leader or how good they're going to be at it, actually deprives the team of the good that God wants to do through them. That's not humility, that's just hiding. I love how C.S. Lewis says it. You probably heard this before. To be humble is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking about yourself less. Now, when I bring up these 3 words, humble, hungry, and smart, maybe that triggered you because you've heard this before. And you didn't hear it from 1 Peter. You actually heard it from a guy named Patrick Lencioni. Patrick Lencioni runs a consulting group in the Bay Area known as the Table Group, all right? He came up with these 3 traits, humble, hungry, and smart. He created an entire leadership model out of it. Take a look at the screen. This is what his model looks like. By the way, you can go on YouTube and you can download dozens of videos, him talking about humble, hungry, and smart. He wrote a book on this that I would highly recommend if you lead a team at work, if you're in charge of a team here at the church. It's called The Ideal Team Player. Let me show you how Peter and Patrick actually sync up on a couple of these things. Peter writes this: if you're gonna be a leader, don't do these 3 things. You can't lead from these 3 drivers. Number 1, it's not because you must. That's right from the text. And it's not pursuing dishonest gain, and it's not lording it over those entrusted to you. So in your notes, number 5, I'm gonna say it this way: leaders are not driven by duty, greed, or the misuse of power. Pause. Leaders are not driven by duty, greed, or the misuse of power. Duty. Not because you must. Don't be driven by duty. What's the opposite of that? It's about being hungry to lead, willing to go the extra mile. Don't be driven by greed, not pursuing dishonest gain. Well, what's the opposite of that? Well, it's humble. Because humility is not focused on what you get out of it, it's what you give to it. And then finally, the misuse of power. He says, don't lord your leadership over those entrusted to you. What's the opposite of flexing your authority unnecessarily? It's about being smart. Having the emotional intelligence to understand yourself and understand those that you're leading, and having the skill to be able to communicate so you can move them from here to there without force. Now, I don't know if Patrick Lencioni, when he was developing this, was actually reading 1 Peter, but he certainly has stumbled upon something that I believe is absolutely biblical. Now, here's what I want you to see. Patrick delves deeply into this, and he gives us a model by saying, what happens if you have 2 of those qualities but lack a third? This is fascinating. Watch this. What happens when you have humble and hungry, but you lack smart? You become what's known as the accidental mess maker. If I could describe that to you, some of you are laughing right now because you know that person. An example of this is my dog, Jake. Sorry if you feel like this is your quality, but my dog, when we first got him as a puppy, he would be playing in a group. He would just run in and just throw himself into the group. And it didn't matter where he landed. He'll walk up to you today and put his nose in places where it doesn't belong. When you're laying on the couch, he will just come up, flop right down on you. He has no sense of personal space. I'll be sitting there on the couch in the morning holding my coffee mug, and if he wants to be petted, he puts his nose right under my arm and does this, and makes a mess. His intentions are really good, but he is an accidental mess maker because he lacks the smarts to know my triggers. Second, there's a group that when you're hungry and when you're smart, but when you lack humble, this person is called the skillful politician. Now, if anybody's in politics, I apologize for this. Not my title. Patrick Lencioni created that title, okay? But this person is actually the most difficult person to deal with and the most dangerous. Here's why. They can appear humble because they know how to be smart with people. But because they lack humility, everything they do is for their own benefit. And often you don't actually identify these people before it's too late and they start hijacking your team or disrupting the group or creating chaos. The skillful politicians, they're hard to spot and they wreck relationships. Here's the third one. The third one, it's what happens when you're humble and when you're smart, but you lack hungry. This person is the lovable slacker. We love them. They're great to be around. They are kind, they're encouraging, and they can't move the ball down the field. You love them being in your group, but when you leave some responsibility in their lap, or you ask, hey, who can do that? They don't raise their hand because they're not hungry. They don't go the extra mile. And they're really hard to get rid of because you really like them. They're smart. They're good. They're humble people. They're super kind. You don't want to hurt their feelings. So you're like, hey, we need to make a change at work. And so whenever you're ready to go, we'd be happy to see you make that change. They're hard to get rid of because we love them. Putting humble, hungry, and smart into practice, let me give you some ideas. I just unleashed something that you could delve into for a really long time. This is not something that you look at once and go, oh, okay, this is great. Now that I got that down. Can I just tell you what you might do with this? Patrick Lencioni, if you watch any of his videos, he'll give you like 5 steps to do. The first is this. It's in your notes. You can go back and look this up later on, download those notes for yourself. Let me just give you 5 things. First is this. Don't label your family. And don't go back to work on that next Zoom call and be like, oh, lovable slacker, skillful politician. Like, don't start labeling your family. Don't start labeling your coworkers. But do this as a team. If you're with a trusted team and you want to see them grow and develop and you want to develop too, here's what you do. Rank yourself. Let them rank themselves. 1, 2, and 3. What's your best? What's your second? And what's the one that you're not so good at? What's your worst, your third? And then you do this. Get together with that team and share your third. Share the one that you don't do well at, because to be an effective leader, you have to have all 3 of these. You're not going to have them all in equal measure, but you should have all 3 of these. So share it amongst your team. And then you do this. Those that know you and you trust, let them coach you. They might tell you, hey, listen, this is why you're a lovable slacker. You don't do this. And you need to start doing this. And if that comes from a friend and a trusted person, that could be gold to you. God might have been putting his finger on it all this time, but you just couldn't see it. And now you have words to articulate the ways that you need to get growing in your leadership. You with me? Rank yourself, share with the team, invite them for your feedback. And honestly, if you really want to work with this, you could develop this entire thing as a leadership model in your family, in your church, and in your workplace. I'm not going to step into that any more than that, other than say there's all kinds of YouTubes. Just look up humble, hungry, and smart, and you can dig into this. So let me wrap up with this. There's 2 opportunities sitting in front of you today. The first is this. Get after it, get growing. Get after it and get growing in your leadership. Humble, hungry, and smart. What do you do great? What do you struggle at? What feedback are you going to get from people? In your current leadership in your family, in your current leadership in your church, in your current leadership at work, how do you need to get growing? My second invitation to you, though, is maybe today's personal for you. Maybe you're sensing, you know what, I've been here as a leader, but when I hear stuff like this, I just wonder what God has for me. And maybe at this moment, you're just thinking, yeah, you know what? I can do that. God, I don't know what you're going to use me for, but today I'm here, but I've got a dream that I'm going to be here in the future. It might be 3, 5, 10 years from now. Maybe it's 3 months from now. But God might be putting his finger on your life today to say, you're a pastor. You're a missionary. You're going to be the next leader in the church. You're going to step up and become a volunteer for a high school group of kids. Maybe God is inviting you to full-time ministry. I hardly ever preach this. I might have been able to count 2 or 3 times in the years that I've been preaching here at this church that I've honestly invited people to ask the question, maybe God's calling you to ministry. Maybe you need to change directions in what you're doing in college right now. Maybe you need to start praying, God, what's the open door you want me to walk through? Maybe it even involves a career change for you. Because God is calling you and inviting you to ministry. It was a lot of years ago that I sat in that wood church pew and listened to Bob Brower preach his guts out. But I'm a pastor today because Bob Brower preached his guts out, and it became personal to me. I'm a pastor today because when I was a 5th grader, Jan Mount put up with 5th grade boys, all boys in one Sunday school class. She put up with us and taught us, and she was totally faithful to us. I'm a pastor today because there was a middle school pastor named Gary Tassone who saw something in me and invited me to do some things, not just listen to some things. I'm a pastor today because there were college professors who loved me enough to call me on my stuff and help me get humble, hungry, and smart. I'm a pastor today because of all the leaders that God has put in my path and the previous pastors who looked at me and said, I think you can do this, and gave me a shot and gave me an opportunity. And I know that when I hear back from people who I've had the opportunity to lead, the privilege to be a part of in our ministry, to hear back from them and them say, you know what, you made a difference in my life. Here it is. There is resiliency that we all need because it's going to be hard, it's going to be difficult, and you're going to want to quit, but in the end, it's absolutely worth it because you will stand before God. And you're going to tell him, God, I gave my best. On the days that I didn't give my best, your grace was all over me. Don't miss this. Peter was not a perfect leader. He was a man marked by failure and denying Christ and sin, who Jesus welcomed back into ministry. And Jesus told him, you want to be a part of me? Then go feed my sheep. Peter, do you love me? Then stand up and lead. Peter, do you love me? Then take care of my flock. And for some of you, that image is becoming clearer to you, that God is calling you to that. Because I will tell you this, it's worth it. Maybe you just need to get growing in your leadership. Get after it. Maybe God's calling you to something more, something bigger, and maybe even full-time ministry. If it's personal today, then listen to his calling. Let's bow our heads and let's pray. God, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for your grace in my life, that I've gotten it wrong so many times, but you were patient with me. And I would ask that right now, God, would you give us the clarity of who we are today so that we can grow? Thanks for picking people like Peter, who messed up so many times, but you kept inviting him back into leadership. God, I also do want to give you thanks that right now, somewhere in this room, somewhere online on that live stream, that you're calling people into ministry. And I pray that they would respond well today. I pray for resiliency, God, for those who might be tired. God, for those who are leading right now, whether it be parents or people in the church or people in the workplace, help them to know that it's worth it. And God, would you give them the strength to move on? God, thank you so much for your word that speaks. We just submit to it and ask that you'd keep leading us and we'd keep following. If you agree to that, would you say amen?